Hello, New Mexico, and welcome to another episode of Around the Roundhouse, a podcast about the policies, politics, and personalities of the state capitol. My name is Margaret O'Hara, and I'm a state government and policy reporter for the New Mexican. You probably noticed I'm not the usual host of this podcast. I'm filling in for Daniel Chacon while he is out this week. Well, it is over. New Mexico's legislative session drew to a close on Saturday, and it ended on a mostly sour note. While Democratic leadership from both houses defended their work on the final day of the session, Governor Lujan Grisham and Republicans expressed disappointment with what they argued was inaction. The governor said we should all expect a special session for lawmakers to keep working on public safety legislation. We are joined this week by New Mexican columnist Milan Simonich. Welcome to the podcast, Milan.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
Well, for starters, tell me a little bit about your observations during this year's legislative session. What did you think of it?
I think they wasted a lot of time. They introduced too many bills. We had some individual legislators introducing 50 or more bills. 60-day session, so you have 112 lawmakers. They all want to pass a bill. Some of them don't care if it's substantial or important. They just want to pass a bill. And so you end up with the staff overworked trying to analyze all of these bills. There was no cohesive strategy from either caucus to winnow this down to a manageable budget of sorts, to where you are focused on 2 or 3 priorities. And they almost never do that, and they didn't do it this time.
And Milan, this isn't your first legislative session, but how was this year different or similar to past sessions that you've seen?
I've seen 15 sessions in New Mexico. This one was in many ways typical in that very few questions were asked about important legislation, such as the budget. Almost none of the legislators who aren't on a finance or appropriations committee dug into the budget. And having covered state politics elsewhere, I've seen budget debates last for days in other states. Here, they seem to want to get it done by asking the finance or appropriations chairperson to explain everything, and most of them blithely go along. No floor amendments, no real discussion of details. And so some of them would hit the broad brush, particularly on the Republican side. They said, well, we're spending too much, which probably is true because the population of this state is flat at about 2.1 million, but the budget does keep increasing by significant amounts.
And tell me a little bit about, we saw this session a real focus on, or a real attempt to focus on public safety and crime. Tell me a little bit about what got done, or from your perspective, what didn't get done.
Well, it's hard to tell what got done because we have to see on matters such as behavioral health. Yes, money is put into it, but does that mean you're going to get outcomes? To get outcomes, you have to have a structure in place with social workers and treatment centers, all of those things that they tell us are so necessary to reduce street crime. If you can reduce the demand for drugs, then theoretically you're going to stop a lot of thefts, a lot of violent crime from desperate people. But those have to be put in place by the health department. And a big criticism of Governor Lujan Grisham's administration is her health department has had money to work with in the past and has not implemented those programs. So there has to be an effort at the executive level to make sure that the money is not only spent, but spent properly. The previous governor, Republican Susana Martinez, gutted the behavioral health system when she claimed there was widespread Medicaid fraud. There was not. But here we are now in the 6th year of Democrat Lujan Grisham's second term, or 6th year overall, and we see that the problem is not appreciably better. So neither governor has done well in that regard, and those are executive level decisions, health department decisions, maybe CYFD decisions. So did they do anything on crime? Not enough. They didn't do anything with drunken driving, which is a huge problem and one that could easily have been addressed with higher mandatory minimums for first, second offenders. Right now, almost no one is going to jail on a first or second offense, and obviously the judges are opting for the low end. So, as the Scandinavian countries do, a mandatory minimum sentence of, say, 10 days would be a deterrent. It's one of the few instances where higher penalties actually work.
And you also mentioned a lack of focus or a lack of attention to detail on the budget. Tell us a little bit about how you read the budget and what kind of attention to detail you'd like to see from lawmakers there.
Well, the budget's almost 300 pages long, and it covers all these agencies. Most of the time, the legislators look at this in a very narrow focus. What's in it for my district or for me personally to hand out in terms of public works projects, which they call capital outlay. But there's very little overall concern about expenditures. And that's a product of them not digging into the budget. And there's an opportunity to do that unless you're a freshman, and there were a lot of freshmen this year. But even then, the interim committees, the budget is being built. I mean, there are no huge surprises of how it's going to go. But not many of them study the budget or know about what's in it except in broad parameters, and then they want to have it explained to them by the finance chairman, the appropriations chairman, so they don't actually have to do any thinking. And most of them are happy that way because it takes some work. And there are people there who are not serious. They are there for very narrow reasons or ego. And so they're not paying attention to what is a fundamental part of every session is passing a budget. And it should be a smart and reasonable set of expenditures, particularly because of the chaos at the federal level with these sort of random cuts that look like they're going to affect a lot of people in this state and every state.
And we've heard calls for a special session to deal with either the public safety issue or with the changes at the federal level. What do you think about that? And how would a special session have to play out in order to be effective?
I don't like special sessions because the ones I've seen in this state are wasteful. They have not been well organized. We saw one last July that blew up in less than a day. That was the governor's fault. Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham and her staff were sloppy. They sent a package of legislative recommendations that kept changing day by day. There was little time to study them. One of her proposals was already in statute. This had to do with a criminal reporting. So you'd have a comprehensive state clearinghouse. That was is already in statute, and that was one of the items she sent along. She got blistered by her own party, or the legislators in her own party for that. There has to be competence in doing this, a real strategy of, okay, what are the one or two or three at most items that we want to focus on? Because these special sessions cost more than $50,000 a day. And that means that money spent, and the legislature is not fully staffed for these sessions, so there's less time to analyze bills. So it's really important that whatever is going to be proposed be done well in advance so they have time to prepare if they choose to do so. So the last one we saw was really the governor's fault. because it fell apart. But the legislature in that case did the right thing. There was nothing to work with that she offered. And she talked, one of the items she had was increased penalties for felons in possession of firearms. They've increased that penalty 3 or 4 times in the last decade. And if you increase that penalty, then that has an effect on prisons. Plus, the federal government already has a law, same law, possession. And a lot of times the federal government prosecutes felons in possession of a firearm. We see this with the Solomon Pena case, the Republican who ran for the legislature after he got out of prison on 19 convictions and theft charges. And then the federal government accused him of hiring gunmen to shoot up the homes and perhaps the people inside them, Democratic politicians. So that was one of her priorities, the governor's priorities for a special session, but it had been dealt with many times over. And so to take up time to do that, if she really wanted that, it could have been done in a regular session, and they could have evaluated whether they wanted to increase the penalty again, because, as I say, it has been increased repeatedly. And that's fine. I think most people would say that if you've committed a felony, possession of a firearm is not a good idea. We hear some resistance to that in Washington now, but for the most part, that's a sensible policy, but she seems to want to just keep going back to it after it's been addressed.
And Milan, from your perspective, were there any positives that came through this session?
Yeah, there were. I thought the constitutional amendment to eliminate pocket vetoes by the governor was a long overdue change. That'll go to the ballot. I suspect it'll pass overwhelmingly because the public, like the legislature in general, does not want vetoes without any explanation. And the pocket veto means the governor can simply ignore a bill. It's vetoed, and no one knows what the problem was with it or why the executive did not like it. The change would mean that if the governor did not take action on a bill, that bill would become law without the governor's signature. I grew up in Colorado, and they already have that system where if the governor, and I saw many times a governor would not want to sign a bill but didn't want to veto it for political reasons, and so it would simply become law without the executive taking any action. And that was a good move, and they've been that bill or that proposed constitutional amendment has been around for a decade. And it shows sort of the ineptitude that something as simple as that. They all talk about transparency, the favorite word. Let's be transparent. Well, there's nothing less transparent than a veto that is unexplained. Bill is vetoed. No one knows why. Governor doesn't have to say a word about it. And yet it takes a decade or more to get that on the ballot, a common sense change. The other thing that I saw as something of a positive were the large number of newcomers who seemed to acclimate pretty well. That would be more true in the House than the Senate. The Senate had 16 new members, but 4 of those were people who came over from the House, and so they knew the system already. And the 3 Republicans who came over from the House performed just as they had in the House. A lot of talking points, a lot of obstinance, but no real strategy on doing anything important.
Well, we will see how that constitutional amendment fares when it goes before the voters. Thank you so much, Milan. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back with another episode next week, and hopefully our host Daniel Chacon will be back too. Until then, I'm Margaret O'Hara, and this is Around the Roundhouse.